one of the newest and most contentious brigades in the Ukrainian army, claimed late last week that it drove Russian troops out of a crucial defensive position south of Bakhmut. The troopers of the 3rd Assault Brigade charged Russian trenches on the western bank of the Donets-Donbas Canal, which runs north to south through the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine and ties Ukrainian defenses to the Bakhmut ruin. Until the 3rd Assault Brigade reportedly dislodged the Russian brigade during a close-quarters trench battle reminiscent of World War I, the 57th Motor Rifle Brigade of the Russian Army held sway on the far side of the waist-deep canal. Colonel on, or before Sunday, the commander of the 3rd Assault Brigade, Andrii Biletskyi, released a video announcing the tactical victory of the unit. The Ukrainians asserted they killed 30 Russians and caught 10 detainees. It's muddled the number of losses the third attack that unit endured. A few troopers from the 3rd Assault Brigade donned helmet-mounted small video cameras as they entered combat. In their videos, 3rd Brigade infantry teams charge into Russian trenches in a bloody battle. The Ukrainians work together to clear dugouts in which Russian soldiers are hiding, yelling to be heard over gunfire and explosions. Even though they are easy to learn, their strategies are well known. Alternating covering one another, little groups of Ukrainian infantry advance along the channel organization, shooting around corners and throwing projectiles into burrows. The Ukrainians can be heard allowing Russian holdouts an opportunity to give up prior to grenading them. The fact that Russian prisoners are a kind of currency with which Kyiv can purchase the freedom of Ukrainian prisoners held in Russia is not necessarily an act of mercy. Potential prisoner swaps could be very personal for the 3rd Assault Brigade. The survivors of the Azov Regiment, which fought in the brutal siege of Mariupol, the port of Ukraine on the Sea of Azov, formed the basis of the brigade. In February 2022, shortly after Russia expanded its war on Ukraine, Russian troops surrounded Mariupol. While the Russians effectively demolished the city and killed tens of thousands, the Azov Regiment and Allied forces held out for 3 months. In May 2022, when the Russians finally took Mariupol, they also took thousands of Ukrainian troops, many of whom were Azov members. Over the next year, Ukrainian officials freed some of the Mariupol veterans through a series of prisoner swaps. However, it appears that several hundred are still in Russian prisons. A member of the brigade's founding unit may be able to return home with every Russian the 3rd Assault Brigade captures. The Kremlin now and again has been hesitant to free Azov veterans, notwithstanding. In Russian propaganda, all Ukrainian troops are Nazis, particularly Azov fighters. The Azov prisoners are proof that Russia is winning, as the regime of Russian President Vladimir Putin describes its war on Ukraine as an effort to denazify the nation. To be very clear, Nazis do not control Ukraine's armed forces or run the country's government. However, it is true that far-right volunteer groups have supported Ukraine since Russia's 2014 attack. The Azov Battalion, one of these groups, eventually developed into the Azov Regiment, which serves as the Ukrainian National Guard. The military back in December stripped off the regiment's Extraordinary Activities Force and framed the 3rd Attack Detachment around it. That is to say, the Azov Battalion's 3rd generation of descendants make up the 3rd Assault Brigade. Time alone has weakened the Azov unit's extreme right belief system. Furthermore, the Ukrainian government has exposed every age to an intentional course of depoliticization that has incorporated the enlistment and preparing of newcomers, and the substitution of key pioneers. It's gullible to guarantee there are no extreme right components in Ukraine's military, remembering for the 3rd Attack Unit. However, claiming that the Russian army contains more right-wing extremists than the Ukrainian army does is also naive. Regardless, the 3rd Attack Detachment pretty much is an ordinary unit in a military that has many of them. Its 2,000 or so officers ride in Western-made M113 and IPR 765 shielded staff transporters. The 3 infantry battalions are supported by a company of tanks, some of which are captured former Russian T-90s. The brigade has been engaged in combat in eastern Ukraine for months. At the point when Russian powers at long last involved the remnants of Bakhmut last month, the 3rd Attack Detachment and contiguous units fell back to the Donets-Donbas Canal, then turned and battled. Ukraine is holding Russia's western advances along the line of Donets-Donbas Canal, transforming the stream into a hindrance as a component of a profound protective zone. The UK Protection Service provided details regarding May 16. At the same time that a larger Ukrainian force is attacking along a number of axes in southern Ukraine, the Ukrainians are now counterattacking on Bakhmut's flanks. Several important towns in Zaporizhia and Donetsk oblasts have been liberated by Kyiv's long-anticipated counteroffensive, which began on June 4. However, in certain areas, the counterattacking Ukrainians ran into stiffer-than-anticipated Russian guards. A shielded attack by the Ukrainian Armed Forces 33rd Motorized Unit and 47th Attack Detachment finished in a debacle south of Mala Tomachka on June 8 when the detachment's Panther II tanks, M2 battling vehicles, and extraordinary braking vehicles stalled out in a minefield. The Ukrainian Counteroffensive Corps apparently had to take a break last week to reset and rethink its strategies after suffering significant losses. The 3rd Attack Detachment's apparently effective getting procedure on the western bank, freed from the Donbas waterway, flags the counteroffensive's resumption and new, more forceful Ukrainian strategies in certain areas. The UK Defense Ministry stated, Ukrainian forces are using the experiences from the first 2 weeks of the counteroffensive to refine tactics for assaulting the deep, well-prepared Russian defenses. Ukrainian units are gaining slow yet consistent strategic headway in key regions.